Hello, my name is Sam Clevenger. My presentation is titled On the Johnstown Flood of 1889 and the Anthropocentric History of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. In the limited space of this presentation, I just want to comment on the increasing need for historical analyses that focus on the environmental consequences of anthropocentric physical cultures, particularly anthropocentric forms of sport and leisure. I will attempt to make this point through the case study of the Johnstown flood of 1889, which remains one of the deadliest and most destructive floods in U.S. history. You're seeing the present site of what was the flood in 1889. I will focus on the role of sport and leisure in the lead up to the flood. The goal is to present the flood as an illustration of the ways in which the prioritizing of leisure and sport at the expense of environmental constraints and safeguards contributed, at least in this historic circumstance, to harmful consequences for the human and the more than human. Anthropocentric forms of sport and leisure were made possible through the altering of the biosphere and then became integral to the destruction of an environment and its inhabitants. And then more broadly, revisiting context of anthropocentric physical culture can provide historical resources to help us rethink our prevailing forms of sport and leisure today in our present day crisis of the Anthropocene. As the critical theorist Mackenzie Work notes, the Anthropocene signals the end of prehistory, the end of the idea that ecologies are self-correcting, self-balancing, and self-healing. We find ourselves in a human-driven, profit-driven environmental emergency that was actively willed into existence by the entrepreneurs of the Industrial Revolution and the agents and processes of Eurocentric colonialism. Modern capitalist Eurocentric sport was intimately tied to these golden spikes of the Anthropocene. So revisiting context of anthropocentric physical culture can perhaps help us better understand both the necessary limits of our prevailing sport and leisure forms today and help us work towards envisaging non-anthropocentric, sustainable ways of the physical cultural. To understand the anthropocentric dimensions of the Johnstown flood, we first need to understand the role of the dam's failure in the flood. Now, the generally accepted narrative on the flood explains that on the night of May 30th and the morning of May 31st, 1889, a torrential rain fell in western Pennsylvania, acutely in the mountainous area around the industrial city of Johnstown. According to popular historian and author David McCullough, it was, quote, the most extensive rainfall of the century for so large an area of the United States, including western Pennsylvania. An estimated 6 to 8 inches of rain fell in 24 hours over a very large central section of the country. Upwards of 10 inches fell in the mountains northeast of Johnstown, including the area of an exclusive upper-class leisure resort, which was just established in 1879, known as the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. The club was situated on a human-made lake, roughly 2 miles in diameter, 7 miles in circumference, 40 feet deep, and containing 20 million tons of water. The lake was retained by an earthen dam that was originally completed in 1853, and by 1889, the dam was in a deteriorated state, not capable of controlling water levels or withstanding a rapid rise due to rainfall. By the afternoon of the 31st of May, the rains caused the lake's water to spill over the dam, and around 3 p.m., the dam gave way. The collapse of the dam released the over 20 million tons of water into the Little Conemaugh River Valley. A 40-foot wall of water and accumulated debris roared down the valley. The flood virtually destroyed everything and everyone in its path, from animals and trees to houses, barns, and bridges, and human beings. By its conclusion, over 2,200 people were declared dead, along with countless animals, trees, and other more than humans. The debris-choked waters made it all the way to Johnstown, destroying a large section of the city. Now, there are at least two key issues related to the anthropocentric in this accepted narrative of the flood. First, the overarching framing in the narrative focuses on the condition of the dam and its failure, and this obscures the force and agency of the rainfall and subordinates it to the dam and its failure. Though, as historian Cynthia Kierner notes, disaster studies scholars reject the rhetorical binary that distinguishes so-called natural disasters from those caused by human error or agency, and favor a spectrum of disaster causation. But this accepted narrative of the flood sort of presents the flood as an unnatural disaster, with much of the blame allotted towards the human villains of the story, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. This is not in any way to excuse the club in its clear critical role in creating dangerous conditions for a catastrophic flood. But it does, however, suggest that the problem of anthropocentrism lies not only in the content of the narrative, but also an embedded anthropocentrism within the form of the historical narrative. Second, the accepted narrative prefigures the dam as a kind of progressive byproduct of the anthropogenic forces of 19th century industrial capitalism. The South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club was located on a former human-made reservoir, which was engineered decades previous to serve as a source of water for the western division of Pennsylvania's mainline canal system. The reservoir was to be sourced by the South Fork of the Little Conemaugh River, which was the river that flowed downstream towards Johnstown. What made the reservoir possible was the South Fork Dam, an earthen and stone structure comprising a combination of horizontal layers of puddled clay and earth on its upstream side, a mixture of slate, shale, small rock, and earth on the downstream side, and a stone culvert at its foundation, with discharge pipes to control the release of water. In other words, the dam was the result of human labor, using the tools of modern industrial power to alter the earth, the material earth, and the water cycle for the purposes of facilitating a transportation system for humans and commodities and creating a dam and a lake. The lake, which the members of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club enjoyed, thus was made possible by the anthropogenic altering of the biosphere and hydrological cycle. The anthropogenic conditions of the lake and dam were compounded by also the anthropocentric intentions of what becomes the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, which entailed creating opportunities for bucolic leisure and sport, which required the continuation of the dam and the lake. As a historian notes, Benjamin Ruff, a Pittsburgh industrialist, purchased the abandoned property, hoping that with the proper amenities, he could turn it into a first-class resort and garner, quote, support of those who could afford to get away to a mountain retreat. His plan, in effect, was to commodify and market the lake through the creation of a mountain resort tailored to the privileged classes. The result was the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, which was established according to its charter of incorporation for, quote, the protection and propagation of game and game fish and the enforcement of all laws of the state against the unlawful killing and wounding of the same. When the club was created, it received no formal public notice, with local newspapers reporting on rumors of a summer resort being built on the site of the former reservoir. Benjamin Ruff then sold shares of the club to the wealthiest industrialists and business figures, Anglo figures of Pittsburgh, including the steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, steel industrialist Henry Clay Frick, and banker and future Secretary of the Treasury Andrew Mellon. Surviving materials related to the club are scarce, and what remains paints an incomplete picture. But we do know that by 1889, the club boasted at least 14, maybe 16 multi-story Victorian cottages, a very large clubhouse and annex for members and their guests, a watchman's shanty, and several boathouses on the shores of Lake Conemaugh, which was the name the club gave for the former reservoir. Judging by the few surviving photographs of club members and club activities during the 1880s, members primarily sought the enjoyment of the bucolic setting through their unhurried forms of leisure and sport, particularly sport involving animal prey. So they had steamboating on the lake, fishing, duck hunting, swimming, cards and billiards in the clubhouse, music on cottage portages, and an annual regatta and feast of lanterns, complete with sculling and canoe races for the children and a pyrotechnic display in the center of the lake. The Victorian elites who comprised the club saw the Lake Conemaugh and the surrounding Allegheny Mountains area as a kind of health-giving tonic to be realized and enjoyed through their idle leisure and sporting pursuits. As a result, anthropocentrism seemed to thread through the club's approach to sport and leisure, often to the neglect of the dam and its condition. The members' human-focused sporting and leisure pursuits led the club to be, for instance, to make dangerous modifications to the dam that inhibited its ability to withstand a rapid rise in water levels. According to a June 1889 report by Engineering News, who inspected the broken dam following the flood, the club had obstructed the spillway by constructing a wooden bridge for guests and installing a row of iron gratings to serve as fish guards. The spillway was originally cut into the rocky hillside at the northern end of the dam. It was some 70 feet wide and 10 feet below the crest of the dam. The point of the spillway was to lower the risk of water overtopping the dam, to release the water, and prevent overtopping even during a storm of dramatic proportions, as one historian put it. The fish guards were put in place not for the benefit of the spillway, but to protect the club's investment in fish. A June 4th, 1881 edition of the Johnstown Tribune reported that the club paid for 1,000 black bass to be fished from Lake Erie, transported in a Palace train car that was equipped with iron tanks and oxygen pumps, and then deposited in Lake Conemaugh. The installed iron gratings were made and put in place to protect the fish and to prevent them from escaping. They were half-inch iron rods, 3/4 of an inch apart, fixed in front of the spillway and adorned with finer wire netting guards to further help prevent the fish from escaping the lake. A floating 8-foot by 8-foot stick with a double row of nails was then attached to the posts of the bridge to serve as an additional barrier. Now, during storms and heavy rainfall, the fish guards accumulated debris, which clogged the spillway and hampered its ability to release rising water. This was then compounded by the club's decision to lower the crest of the dam by at least a few feet in order to create a wider thoroughfare for traffic. In fact, the club lowered the crest of the dam without also cutting deeper into the rock of the spillway, and this further reduced the spillway's capacity and effectiveness. Without discharge pipes in the stone culvert, the spillway was the dam's only mechanism for controlling rising water levels, and the club willfully reduced the spillway's capacity through the installation of the bridge, the fish guards, and lowering the dam's crest. Reports after the flood often highlighted these obstructions in the spillway as part of their analysis into why the dam failed. The anthropocentrism of the club emerged as much from what the members in the club did as what they did not do, or to be more precise, what they neglected. The neglect of the already human-altered environment in favor of preferred sport and leisure forms illuminates an important point about the links between anthropocentric physical culture and environmental change. For example, historians have underscored the significance of the club's shoddy repairs of the dam, which then increased the risk of a catastrophic flood happening. When the club inherited the dam in 1879, it was in a deteriorated state. It was missing its valve discharge pipes that controlled the release of water, and the dam was eroded because of heavy storms decades previous. The club, however, decided to board up the culvert instead of replacing the necessary discharge pipes. The club then paid workers to fill in the dam with a kind of mishmash of local rock, mud, brush, even hemlock, hay, and sometimes horse manure, instead of carefully puddling clay and earth to create a watertight mixture. In the years before the flood, there was a noticeable sag in the middle of the dam, which was an alarming indicator that the patched-up dam was having difficulty retaining the lake water and was in danger of collapsing. Without historical documents that detail the decisions made by club owners and their thought processes, we are left to speculate as to why they chose a low-grade approach to repairing the dam. However, the club neglected the dam as club members enjoyed sport and leisure on and around Lake Conemaugh. So their activities were anthropocentric in terms of the forms they took and the more than human perspectives they silenced. This is a valuable lesson to glean from the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club because it underscores the consequences of human activity and willful inactivity in circumstances already altered by human activity. Now, there are important issues in the history of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club that have not been adequately addressed here, particularly in terms of the Victorian social divisions that were reproduced through the club activities. A critical analysis of sport and leisure at the club would need to attend to such social issues, which would provide more contextual complexity and nuance necessary for better understanding the anthropocentric dimensions of the club and the disaster. Thank you.